What are you at, guys? My name is Troy and welcome back to Facility D20. This is part 2 in our Necron Overloard paint scheme. In this video we're going to be showing you guys how I achieve the highlights, the object source lighting, the basing, and the final touches to this mini. So in this video, guys, we're going to look at how I worked up the highlights. In this next sit down of this painting session here, I tried to readjust my camera and turn the automatic focus on to see if it worked any better. Now in a little bit I ended up turning it off again. But the first thing I did here is I started with some more Formula P3 metallics. This time I use brass balls. Even though it says brass, it's still a gold color. So I started to slowly work up the edges of the gold bits, not necessarily doing an edge highlight technique, but trying to work up a brighter gold along the edges, and just carefully take my time to make sure I lay down the highlight smoothly here. I watered the paints down a little bit. Again, I didn't use a wet palette for the reasons of the metallics seeping through the parchment, and I didn't want to ruin my wet palette. Here you can see I'm just kind of mixing the paint through to test its transparency, see if I watered it down enough. Then I had to remind myself, hey, these are supposed to be quick paint jobs. So instead of going in and blending up all these metal plates on the back, I just decided to go ahead and just use the simple tried and true dry brushing technique, and just to lay the gold on this way. And you know what, realistically this works just as well as layering it up, especially if you're not going for that painting kind of scale. It actually works well with the way in which you wash it. But then I decided to work it up one more time with a brighter color gold. This time I went in and I used the Citadel Heroic Armor Gold, the layer paint, and I just carefully laid down this time some again, not edge highlights, but highlighting along the edges to kind of just make these metal plates pop a little bit. So you can see here I just doing just all the edges and leaving the centers of these plates in that kind of more distressed look. So trying to get it up close to the camera to show you I'm just hitting the edges here, and I'm using the Army Painter Fine, or maybe it's the Insane Detail brush here. Either way, this brush is also in rough shape, so I kind of use it for my metallics. I didn't want to use my new good brushes on these metallic paints. And then I painted up these small spheres, and when you're painting round objects you want to kind of realize how light would hit a sphere and how it would kind of hit it and spread out almost like a little cap on top of the ball. So with that in mind, I just went down and I just kind of, you can see here around the center midpoint, I just done a circular highlight along these spheres on the bottom. And then I decided to go in and use another Formula P3. This time I used Formula P3 Quicksilver, which was slightly brighter than the cold steel that I used before. And I use this to work as a highlight over all the steel I painted before. So around the collarbone here, I added some highlights along the tubes on the arms and the legs. I use the highlights. It's a fairly bright silver, and once I started working it up over the cold steel that had been washed a couple times, it really it popped well. So I was debating using this silver to just edge highlight this color shift paint, but I decided not to afterwards, and it's because I realized that if I go down that path I'm going to have a lot of Necrons that I'm going to edge highlight. So I just kind of want to make the Vallejo Colorshifter Paint act as the unique factor to this model, so I decided not to do any edge highlighting along the armor bits. But I did make sure I went in and highlighted all the silver bits. You can see along the staff I'm just laying down a bit of a edge highlight. This is a bit of a combination between an edge highlight and a dry brush, what I'm doing here, and this is just to try to pick up the little pieces along the back of the spine. And I wanted to be careful here not to brush any of the color shift plates. So I just carefully edge highlight them up. I edge highlight here, and by edge highlight I mean I get a little bit of paint and the brush, and I use the edge of the brush instead of the tip of the brush, and just a up and down fashion, as you can see here. Sort of looks like dry brushing with the camera sped up, but it's just a up and down rub of the brush on the edge. And then I decided I want to try to get some shadows into this armor plating, and I didn't know how it would take to a wash. If I just washed the whole mini in a nut oil, would that affect the way in which the color shift paints work because of how the light hits them? So I was a little hesitant to try just a full wash. So what I did is I just went in and I like pinpointed some places where I added some shadows with the nut oils. So anywhere where two armor plates would touch, like along the thighs, or in these creases and crevices along his back plate, or under his underarms, anywhere where I saw like two armor plates kind of meet, I decided to add just a couple light layers of wash pinpointed exactly in that spot. And it actually worked out at the end of the day. It kind of added a bit of depth and a bit of shadows to those recesses. So so it kind of worked out pretty decently. Then I went in, I just used some Army Painter matte black, and I just base coated the weapon on the top and the bottom, because there was a lot of overspray from the airbrush and the metallic paints. So in preparation for painting this earlier, I just give it a wash. So here you can see quickly, when I put it up to the camera, you can see how it's laying down there, a bit of the shifting in the paint. So next I decided to work up purple on the weapons and jewels and gems. And I used the D&D Purple Worm, and I believe this is made by Gale Force 9 Paints. Got these as a part of a D&D starter set, monster colors. So I laid down the purple worm as a base coat color to work up the orbs and gems from. And I thought purple would be a nice, it wouldn't be too bright, but it would be a nice contrast against all this metallic. So I just slowly and carefully worked up the purple. And again, I was really careful here around his fingers and his wrists and his palms, because I wanted to make sure that I didn't smear, because I knew it would be hard to make touch-ups on this color shift paint. So then I decided to start to wash all the purple bits in Citadel shade, the violet shade, Dursarai Violet I believe it's called. I can't really tell because the name of it's kind of messed up on my pot here, but it's the violet shade. So I just carefully layered some shade down on all the purple. And around these gems, where the gems meets the metal bits here, around this loincloth, I made sure to pool the wash along the gem and the metal bits to kind of add depth between the metal and the gems. Then I carefully done a purple gem on his head and two by his collarbones. There was a few other places on the miniature that I could have done some gold accents and some more gemstones, but again I had to remind myself I'm trying to do a fairly quick paint job here. And then I tried to just edge highlight the black and purple to see what it looked like if I would leave the weapons like that, and I honestly did not like it at all, so I kind of abandoned that early on. And here I just, with the nut oil wash, I just added a few more shadows around the collarbones areas, for lack of a better word. Once the purple dried, I gave it another violet shade here. So I kind of, a lot of times I'll paint and I'll do multiple thin coats of shade or wash. Usually the first one is the entire piece, and then I'll start just picking spots in which I want to lay down the shade more. And when you just slowly work your washes and shades up like this, you can almost make like a wet blend effect with only using your base color and your shade. Just like 5 or 6 layers of shade, just slowly work them up. With the orb, for example, I pull the model out of view a few times here because I'm kind of getting it really close to my face. So I apologize for that, but I'll have a little better setup for the next painting video. So yeah, I just slowly worked up multiple layers to get this effect. And then I decided I had to start highlighting this purple up again and create the OSL effect. So I had a purple that was very close to the worm purple called Beholder Purple. So I decided to mix this up. So I added some glaze medium and airbrush thinner into my little pot there, in preparation to mix them up. And then I realized, hey, I really don't like this weapon. I'm just going to go ahead and paint the whole thing in purple and just try to do some sort of cool, quick effect with my airbrush here. So I was a little impatient here, and I was a little too thick with my paint, and I kind of, you can see the paint's acting a little thick here. So I try to water it down a bit as I'm going. I should have took a little more time here, but I was a little bit frustrated with how long this paint job was taking me, and the fact that I had to redo a few bits. Overall, this paint job, I think, took me about 8 hours, and a good 2 of those hours was just me deciding which colors to use and how I wanted to paint this model. So when I mix up a OSL color or anything that's super light, I like to start with a white first. So I just mix up some matte white by Army Painter, and then I added one singular drop of Beholder Purple into it. And that's because you don't need a lot of colored paints to work up the color. But then I had to add a second drop because it wasn't quite enough. So this actually took quite a bit of mixing. This really didn't want to mix very well. And I've noticed that with these Gale Force non-D&D paints and the Army Painter paints, they will mix with a thinner or like a Windex or something like that. But you really need to mix it here. So I gave it a good stir. I got it to consistency to feel with my fingertip that I like it, and I loaded half of it into the airbrush anyway. And I just, you can see I adjust my airbrush here, and that's just to allow me to open the trigger up. Not too much to overspray it, but enough to get some paint flowing. So I had to adjust my pressure a couple times on this airbrush. I find when I'm airbrushing white paint, it's always very difficult, and it likes to splatter, it likes to streak, and it's hard to find white for whatever reason, good consistency. So I think I'm going to be switching over to white inks from now on. It seems like white inks will spray a little easier through the brush. But when I finally fooled with it enough, I got the consistency going, and I did what we'd like to call the lazy man object source lighting here, the OSL lighting. And I just hit the sphere from the top down and kind of try to get this hyper purple glow out of it. You can see here I'm protecting the model with my hand so I don't get overspray. And my airbrush needle is getting a little wore out now, and I'm getting a lot more overspray than I want. And I was getting frustrated, and I wasn't particularly happy with this OSL. It just oversprayed a little more than I wanted it to, and the white was giving me problems, but I fought it, and at the end of the day, it turned out pretty good at the end of the day. I'm happy enough with it. It was a fairly quick OSL. It didn't take a lot of time, so I think that's what I was going for here. Once I spray on my OSL lighting, I always like to go in with my shade again and hit any real deep recesses that the light wouldn't get to, like right along the palm of the hand here. Even around his wrist, which is actually silver, I added some purple wash in the crevices of his wrist and in his forearms, and even some along his helmet and his collarbone areas. So a lot of time once the OSL lighting is done, I like to go in and just hit the recesses with a darker color. It kind of gives it that effect that the light is hitting the high places. So here I just went ahead and gave a heavy wash of purple along the weapon. And that was to kind of darken up the shade a bit like the orbs and the gems were. And then I just used the paint that I had mixed for the airbrush, again, that lighter color. And I just went in and added some swirl marks along the orb. And I just added some high points along the gems. Just gave it a touch of that color to make the OSL pop a little bit more. Then I decided I was going to go ahead and just start playing with the airbrush along the weapons. So I masked the mini off with some masking tape. And sticky tack is also a good little tool to use. You can get in there and put it in the small spots. I gave the weapons a second heavy coat of violet. I kind of used my airbrush too to make it dry a little quicker. And basically what I wanted to do here was just bring in a high and lows to the purple. So I mixed up some purple worm first, and I hit it with some purple worm followed by some beholder purple, so which is like just 2 tones of purple. And another tip I'd like to give you guys, if you've got a whole army to paint up, is sometimes it's better to try not to mix a lot of colors, because if you mix colors, that means every single time you paint up that mini, you have to mix that color, and after a while your consistencies are never going to be the same. So an old tip that I picked up over the years is trying to get the same color. So with this, I didn't want to do a gradient or a power sword technique because I didn't want to mask it off and use multiple colors. I just wanted to kind of make a glowing effect here. So I just hit this weapon along the middle and brightened it up along the middle and left the edges dark. And I was real careful down at the base to just give the base of the weapon a little bit of a highlight, because I didn't want to overspray too much on the mini. So once that was laid down, I used the lighter beholder purple color, loaded that into the airbrush, and just hit it with the second color gradient here. So between the base coat, the washes, and these two colors here, I kind of made this pop a little. You can see it now, you can see it really popping when the airbrush hits here. So it kind of made a quick and dirty lighting effect that I figured I could reproduce fairly quickly over an entire army. So I was happy enough with how much time it took me. I might go back and rework a little in the future this army scheme that I'll be painting, but considering this was a test mini, I was happy enough with it. Once this was done, I went again and I took my violet wash and I laid it down in right in the crevices of all these markings on the weapons. So you want to be careful when you're doing this to lay it down carefully in the crevices. And here you can see I'm just highlighting, washing some of the places where the OSL light hit. So once the OSL was done, I figured I was, you know, for the amount of time it took, I figured it was okay. I'm not thrilled on it, but it'll do for now. And then I took some dark gray. Again, this is the Gale Force 9 D&D paints called Dungeon Stone. I painted up the handle of his weapon in dark gray, and this is in preparation to do this in black. Personally, it's a personal preference, but I don't like the way black edge highlighting works. So I done that and started to let it dry, and I decided to use the P3 cold steel again to just kind of pick out a few more details on the miniature, just to try to get away from all that color shift tones. While those two colors were drying, I decided I was just going to do a simple cork base here. So I just grabbed another base I had lying around, ripped up some pieces of cork board to make it fit. I'm kind of doing your typical pavement, cracked pavement look here. Glued them on with some crazy glue. Then I decided to go in and add a little bit of slate. I don't know where I picked this stuff up. I think it was a GW kit back a few years back. So instead of using the white glue here, I just used the crazy glue gel because it just dries a lot quicker, and I didn't want to wait around a lot for it to dry. So I just added a few random bits of slate all over the place. And the nice thing about crazy glue, it dries fairly quick, but you want to make sure that it is dry before you start to paint over it, or you're going to ruin your brushes. So again, talking about how I work up the black. So instead of doing the black, I usually start with a gray base and just wash it multiple times until I get up a real rich black. And then I might go in and add a few little highlights. But this particular staff only took about 2 coats of nut oil, then it was looking fairly good. So I used one of my old brushes here and just whacked the base coat of Army Painter Matte Black to this base. Got it completely covered, went in, gave it my weapons here the second coat of nut oil, and you can see how this is really getting dark now. So Once the second coat, heavy second coat dried, I was happy with it, and I decided to leave that for my blacks on these this particular scheme. Then I went in, I hit the Dungeon Stone Gray again, and I just gave I wouldn't call this a dry brush, this is a bit of an overbrush, which is just a way in saying a heavy dry brush. So I just heavily dry brushed up this cork board to try to get some gray tones into the black. Once that was done, I used some Vallejo Ghost Gray, and you can see I kind of squirted a lot of it because this gray is kind of getting old and clumpy on me, but it'll still work fine for a dry brush. So this is a fairly bright gray, almost a white color. So I went in and just gave a second dry brush, concentrating on the edges and the rocks that I glued on here just to make the space pop. And then I done this exact same technique under his foot to kind of make that little bit of a rock that he's standing on blend into the base. Use my X-Acto knife to carefully pop him off the base. Test fitted his position along the base and went ahead and glued him on. Use lots of crazy glue here and glued them on. Now the worst thing about using these cork bases, if you don't pin them, and personally I just don't pin them because I just don't like to take that extra time. After a while you'll probably pluck them off the base with a little bit of cork glue to their feet. So if you're moving this army around a lot, I'd suggest you pin the models. Then I use a little Frost Tough by Army Painter just to add some flair to the base and glued it on the front. I watered down some white glue and used an old cheap brush to paint some white glue along the base, and used some dark green flock here just to kind of add a bit of a moss, a bit of a green growth over this old pavement or ruin scape here. Just kind of add a little bit of contrast along the base. And a good tip to do this on some paper, that way you can just pour the excess right back. Here's an important tip. Always paint the rim of your bases. You can see here adding this clean black line along the rim here really makes the rest of the model pop, and in my opinion the model just don't look finished until the rim has been painted. Again, there's a few crystals under his feet which I really disliked about this model. I really didn't like those crystals, especially the way it blended in with the weapon, but I just painted them like the weapon itself and gave it a few heavy washes of purple and a few little line highlights. And at this point is when I would seal the model. So I used some Vallejo satin varnish, but this varnish I think been sitting on my shelf a little too long. This is the first mini I painted in about 10 months. And this wash, this satin varnish, sorry, when I laid it on, it just was looking real matte. So I always hit the base first when I'm varnishing. That way I can see how my top coats, because I don't trust top coats, whether they're gloss, matte, or satin. And I was not happy with how the satin was laying down, so I didn't seal this model. And I just left it the way it was. I might go back and seal it at a later date, but I just did not trust that satin varnish. And the final thing I did was add a gloss coat to the weapons and the orb. So here you can see the final result of the color shift paint. You can see as I spin the model, you can see green along the inner legs and silvers and violets. There you can see it around where the cloak and spine meets. You can see the violets. There's just no way to pick up the actual color on camera. It was so difficult to pick up the color here. In real life, I must say that it definitely hues more green than what you see here. Almost a green metallic to purple. This is a fairly close representation of what it looked like. But overall, I think that I can reproduce this color scheme now that I got it locked in on, say, a simpler model like a Necron Warrior. I could probably do up a Necron Warrior in a couple hours with this scheme. So in a couple of sittings, I could probably do up a squad. So I think that I kind of got what I wanted here, a fairly unique paint job that didn't take too long. I hope this video was helpful to you guys, maybe a few tips just to show you how I did it. You can see that this particular angle is a lot more detailed. I'm going to have a better setup for the next video to allow me to film like this while I'm painting, and I'll be a little more conscious of where I place the model while I'm painting, but There was a few tricks I had to learn, but I'm hoping to get a little better in the future. I have a lot more Indomitus stuff coming up. Both the Primaris Marines and the Necrons will make appearances on this channel in the future. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the Marines. If you guys got any schemes, leave them in the comments. Be sure to subscribe if you like this video. And hopefully, as this channel grows, I can do more of these videos to you. But it was a little difficult editing 8 hours of raw footage down to 2 20-minute parts or so. So guys, that was part 2. I hope you enjoyed this little painting tutorial. In the future, I've got some plans to get a new boom arm, a little bit of a different setup to try to get my video a little clearer and in there a little closer. I'm going to be painting up some Necron warriors, some Primaris Space Marines. As I said, I've got a ton of D&D minis and models kicking around. So anytime I paint anything from here on out, I'm going to grab my camera, I'm going to bring you guys in, show you a few tips and tricks about how I accomplish those things. So if that's something you guys are interested in, go ahead and mash that subscribe button, give me a like, help my channel get a little bit of momentum here, and thanks for subscribing, I really appreciate it. Shout out to the guys in the Dungeon Discord, they're helping me out a lot. And until next time, I'll catch you around.